So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm CMTA's membership director, Catalina Lira, and this is our collaboration webinar with our associate member, Adastra. To give you an overview of who we are and our leadership, we have Lance Hastings, who's our president and CEO, Robert Spiegel, who's our vice president of government relations, who will be giving us an update on SB 253 and 261 today, as well as Ananda Roshida, our vice president of communications, and Katie Durham, our vice president of member engagement. And what we do is advocacy, communications, membership, and impact for California manufacturers, as well as connecting them to resources and solution providers such as our associate member, Adastra. And today for our main speaker, we have Alena Miazga, who is the Director of Management and ESG for Adastra. So I'll let her take it from here.
Thank you so much, Catalina, for the introduction. Just a quick background about myself. I've been in data management analytics for more than 11 years, and a lot of our clients, they do have a lot of ESG requirements, and that's why we've been looking into this space for the past several years and learning more and more together. So today, our conversation will be around navigating ESG with data, what we can do in terms of just reporting, what we can do in terms of sustainable innovation, how data and analytics can help us to become a better organization, a more innovative organization, and bring ourselves to the new levels in the market. Just a quick note, housekeeping item. I'll turn off my camera for now, just so that everyone's focusing on what's going on in the slide deck. And whenever there are questions, feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to leave them in chat. So I'll be keeping an eye on everything that's happening inside the call as well. Or feel free to keep your questions till the end. We'll have a sort of Q&A session where everyone will be able to ask anything they wanted to ask me during the hour we have today. All right, just literally a couple of words about my company. I work for Adastra. We're a global organization. We are spread over the world across at least 8 countries with offices. We have more than 2,000 people working with us. So mainly we're focused on the United States and Canada, but also we have a few offices in Europe as well as in Asia. And what we do is we focus on, as I mentioned, anything data related. So pretty much we work with our customers to understand their business model, to understand their business strategy, and ensure that the data starts supporting what they are trying to do and bring them to the next level within their within their business domain or within their market. So let's get started with the main topic of today's conversation. So as I mentioned, from ESG planning to innovation, how data can power this journey for you. Now, we'll start from a quick introduction of what ESG is, because not everyone is familiar with the term. Of course, it's becoming more and more popular lately. You're hearing this on the news, websites everywhere. Everyone's talking about ESG, sustainability. So what is ESG? As you can see here, ESG in general is a framework where we have 3 components. E, which is environmental, that's where we focus on anything related to climate change, anything related to carbon emissions, any other gases emissions, as well as water consumption, water usage, and waste and pollution production by organizations. Now, there are other 2 components, social, which is focusing on working conditions, local communities, anything related to conflicts inside the organization, as well as external conflicts, health and safety, which is extremely important for anyone who is doing any sort of manufacturing, as you know, as well as employee relations and diversity inside the company. Now, the last but not the least component of ESG is governance, and that's where we're talking about things like executive pay, fair pay within the organization, bribery and corruption, making sure that organizations they have proper processes, frameworks, and inside the company to ensure that this is not happening. Anything related to political lobbying, donations, for diversity and structure, making sure that it's balanced in terms of gender, in terms of representation from minorities and various groups, as well as tax strategy. Now, from our experience, why organizations are focusing on ESG, and we sort of identified three main goals or three main buckets that we can classify different companies and think about it this way. So number one is probably the biggest one at the moment, that's compliance and regulations. As I mentioned, you're hearing about ESG more and more every day, and it's all about upcoming regulations, upcoming mandatory reporting around ESG, and more, not only countries, but even states bring up new regulations and new requirements for ESG reporting. And the main issue in this case is that all those reporting requirements are quite complex, and many organizations, they might have ESG consultants or they might have ESG departments internally, but at the same time, to support the solution by data usually takes a lot of technical skills and understanding of their entire data platform or the entire, I would say, data that is available within the company. So usually, to ensure that they meet all those requirements with precision and expertise, they need support to meet those emerging data needs. Now, the second category here would be organizations who are following market demand. And here, this is more about capturing new growth opportunities, making sure that we're enhancing our competitive edge, because from what we've seen recently is that our consumers and investor expectations around ESG evolving and growing every single day. And as an example, some of our retail, I would say, retail chains, what they do is sometimes they even mention on their price tag saying that, well, for this product specifically, we produced XYZ emissions, but for the other product, similar products from the same category, we produced way less emissions. So some customers actually prefer to buy the product that was more sustainably produced or manufactured. And that's how all those organizations trying to create significant brand differentiation in this sustainably focused market, which is extremely competitive at the moment. Now, the last, I would say, bucket, which is on the rise right now, and we're seeing more and more questions or more and more inquiries around this, is innovation and leadership. So that's the companies that are trying to implement their data-driven approach within their business strategy, within their business model, and take their ESG performance to the next level. So they're looking at their resource consumption, they're looking at their energy consumption, they're trying to optimize costs, optimize anything they use, reduce waste, reduce water consumption, reduce emissions, and of course, bring a lot of innovation in their supply chain, because essentially supply chain is a massive producer of carbon emissions and any other E-related components. So now for them, basically their ESG challenges are becoming their long-term advantages, because if you think about it, every sort of energy optimization, every maybe route optimization for supply chain, in the end of the day, yes, it makes us more sustainable, it makes us more ESG friendly, but at the same time, it brings a lot of savings from the cost perspective. And a few additional business outcomes that we were also noticing, just kind of to summarize those three buckets. Of course, customer and employee preference for ESG products. Not only we observed customers who are looking for more sustainable products, but also in some companies, employees also care a lot about not only climate portion of ESG, but also about social and governance metrics. They're looking for organizations with very strong, solid culture that is supportive of each other, etc. And of course, this way you attract not only more customers, but also better employees, which helps you to facilitate your top line growth. Now, as I mentioned, emissions reduction. On the other side of this is reduction of the cost. You have, again, as sort of a consequence of the first item here, we have purpose-driven workspace. So we have increased workforce productivity with people who are motivated, who really like where they work, and who are interested in helping your organization, your company to grow even more and to become even a better organization. Now, regulatory compliance, of course, there are two sides to this. On one hand, we're trying to avoid any penalties by submitting our reporting on time with all requirements. But at the same time, we can also tap into various tax benefits, various, I would say, government programs that are available for people who actually are interested in ESG and are following sustainability path. Reporting transparency. So definitely that's where you're building your brand recognition, trust, reputation on the market. And again, it goes back to bringing more clients, to bringing better employees, and to building your company's image in the market. And of course, high ESG performance becoming more and more important to the investors, so it positively impacts your share price. Just literally a couple of words about different ESG frameworks and initiatives. I know that I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with different frameworks. So you probably heard about things like TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. Many companies submit their CDP response for Carbon Disclosure Project. But as you know, it all started a long time ago with GRI, and then CSR, corporate social responsibility, slowly evolved into more, I would say, broad standards such as SASB, TCFD, and now actually just recently, I believe all those standards, so TCFD standard was transformed into ISSB, so International Sustainability Board will take over and sort of provide guidance to everyone on how to submit their disclosures and how to submit their reporting. At the same time, again, so all these frameworks, they are standards or recommendations, but then at the same time, there are proper requirements, usually based on a country or on a specific legislation within your state, your county, your province. As many of you heard about CSRD probably, so that's the regulation that came out in European Union, and it will make it mandatory for majority of their companies to submit ESG reporting according to that specific template and regulations. I'm going to pass it over to Rob to explain the specific California disclosure requirements, and yep, please take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Alena, and good morning, everybody. Matter of introduction, Rob Spiegel. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations for CMTA, and definitely pleased to be supporting one of our associate members this morning at Adastra and kind of going through what has been an ongoing topic here in California, whether it be regulation or legislation as it relates to ESG. And as part of that, we all understand, unfortunately, as businesses in California, that E, or the environmental of that ESG, continues to be a very serious consideration by not only the state legislature, but also the governor and the various regulatory agencies. And so late last year, the California legislature passed two, I'll call them foundational pieces of legislation that will impact any company doing business in the state of California. And if you want to go through the legalities of what it means to be doing business in the state, I definitely encourage you to look at the Franchise Tax Board and their definitions. It's minimal. Essentially, if you have one employee in the state of California making upwards of almost $70,000, you are technically doing business in the state. If you have gross receipts, I think are in the neighborhood of about $500,000, you are also doing business in the state of California. And the reason I bring that up is there's been a lot of misinformation surrounding SB 253 and 261, where yes, 253 is a reporting element for businesses that do $1 billion or more of, I'll say it, business within the state of California. The difference, though, between SB 253 and when I mean all of the other businesses that also are going to require to report is that a SB 253 requires a scope 3 calculation. A scope 3 calculation is essentially the value chain for a business or an entity. And the value chain is essentially your supply chain. It's emissions from your suppliers, it's emissions from business travel, it's emissions from employee commutes and other considerations. And unlike what the federal government or the Securities and Exchange Commission passed back in March, there's no degree of materiality, meaning as long as there is a emission period, the state of California and SB 253 will require you to report it. There's no threshold. It doesn't mean that if it's 1% of your total company emissions, are you going to somehow be able to skirt reporting? But the real challenge for any manufacturer, any business who is that reporting entity at $1 billion will be how do we calculate and with the degree of certainty any of the emissions associated to any of our suppliers. Obviously, some of the aerospace sector, for example, have over 15,000 suppliers. And so the coordination and cooperation with the resources board, all of your suppliers, the entities within it's going to be quite challenging. And then pivoting very quickly to SB 261. 261 is slightly different. For companies with $500 million in revenue, you're going to have to report essentially a climate-related financial risk. Here as well, though, the scope 3 challenges remain. You're going to have to also disclose any climate-related risk associated to your suppliers that may be located in, let's say, like Bangladesh or Indonesia. And so there's variations and various considerations there that are going to make it quite challenging as well. So for SB 253 and 261, approximately a year ago next week, the governor at the Climate Week in New York signed both pieces of legislation. Late 2023, I should say, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as well as some other of our allies, filed suit against SB 253 and 261, claiming that it was a violation of a business's right to free speech, as well as some of the, I won't say novel, but some of the reoccurring themes that we see in these lawsuits regarding interstate commerce and things of that nature. That litigation is still pending. I imagine that will kind of work its way through California's courts here over the next couple of years. But regardless of the ongoing litigation, California and the legislature, as well as the governor's office and the California Air Resources Board, has started this process of going through how do you implement SB 253 and 261. And quite literally right out of the gate, the problem was, well, CARB doesn't have any money to do this. California was facing a nearly $70 billion deficit, and none of the resources were provided to CARB. And that's where the legislature and the governor disagreed on when implementation would happen. SB 253 requires regulatory development and regulations to be adopted by January of next year. Well, quite honestly, that's not going to happen. We all know that's not going to happen. And CARB was not granted the resources to implement 253 and 261 until June of this year, to the tune of about $30 million. So with the ongoing issues surrounding implementation deadline, the legislature and Senator Wiener in particular introduced Senate Bill 219. And Senate Bill 219 accomplished really two main things. First and foremost, the regulatory development for 253 was bumped out until July 1 of 2025. I'll get to that in a minute. The other element of this, of 219, was that it allowed a parent company to consolidate reporting across its various subsidiaries. So if you are, let's say, a large company with many different affiliations, I'll say, perhaps like a Caterpillar or a Koch Industries or something like that, with many different subsidiaries that are also operating at $1 billion threshold doing business in the state of California. The problem there is that the parent company would be duplicating the reporting elements of each one of its subsidiaries that it also owns. And so with that, SB 219 now allows for the parent company to consolidate all those reporting elements associated to 253. And that should help at least verify or maintain a degree of accuracy with that data. Now, the challenge here is that while SB 219 is definitely an improvement, it doesn't quite literally solve all of the challenges that we've seen with SB 253. And so we're waiting for the governor to sign SB 219, but at least we do get some degrees of flexibility as it relates to implementation of the reg. Now, as I'm getting close on time, the only other element that I want to talk about very quickly is for CMTA and our members and those of you who have joined us today, there's been a lot of concern surrounding, is CARB going to be able to do this job within the timeline or within the structure of what SB 253 and 261 requires? And there's a couple of important considerations that I want folks to remember as we go through the regulatory development process. CARB is going to have to develop two regulations. SB 253 will be separate and distinct from SB 261, yet companies are going to have to be reporting under both essentially mechanisms. So in order to accomplish that, as CARB put together their financials for a budget augmentation this year, they gave us some indications, as well as in some conversations we've had with the agency, about what we as stakeholders or what covered entities are going to expect over the next 2 to 3 years. And so while the budget passed in late June or mid-June, early July, the timeline for implementation as provided by CARB really gives us an idea of when do we need to start paying attention to the Air Resources Board and the regulatory development process. And so between July 24 and July of 2025, the Climate Corporate Data Risk Accounting Branch, which is now an internal branch within CARB, is going to be charged with implementing this program. It's going to be staffed with quite literally over 100 individual staff members, or what we call PYs, as well as division and branch chiefs. And so this new branch is going to be the one that starts developing the regulations, contacting the estimated 10,000 entities who will have to report under SB 253, and really get the process rolling. But between now and July 2025, there's no regulatory development yet, because quite frankly, CARB hasn't done the hiring of the staff or put the people in place to actually do the work that's required. As we get into July of 2025 and 2026, that is where you will start to see, I believe, the conversations with CARB, the stakeholder working groups, and the other elements that are truly going to inform the development of the regulation, as well as the development of the public access program that's required under 253, as well as the various other considerations that are going to be required. So my point, while CARB is asked to finish the regs by July of 2025, I don't see that as possible. There's no way in which all of the hiring and all of the development, as well as abiding by many of the steps that have to be done under the Administrative Procedures Act, will CARB be ready to essentially finalize regulations July 1st of next year. So July of 2025 to July of 2026 is probably the most accurate time frame that we have in terms of when regulation will start being developed and discussed at the agency. Now, post 2026 and into 2027 and 2028, that is where the implementation activities and the various considerations of when businesses will have to report their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, et cetera, and scope 3, as well as the disclosures that are required under SB 261 will begin. It'll start in about roughly 2027. And from there, the program in and of itself will probably go through many different iterations as to how the agency is trying to determine with a degree of accuracy and accountability what those disclosures and what that data will be. So as we get through and we get into the regulatory development process, I can assure you that at least for CMTA, we will be engaged in that. I know that many of our members and those of you on this call have been concerned with it, but you know, as we go through that process, we definitely look forward to continuing the dialogue that we've had with CARB over the last several years, even involving the earlier iteration of SB 253, which was SB 260, literally a little over 2 years ago. So with that, I don't have anything else to add. It's more of an update as to where we are in California as it relates to 253, 261 implementation, as well as the new bill, SB 219. And to really end on one other note, while SB 219 does make improvements, it does not change the dates where companies are required to report your scope 1 and your scope 2 emissions. That will still happen in 2026. Does it happen in January of 2026 or maybe mid-year or at the end of, end of the fourth quarter in 2026, I think would be more appropriate. And it also does not change, though, the Scope 3 emission reporting that will have to be done or have to be started in 2027. So the dates of reporting are going to be consistent with what we see in 253, but at least in terms of the regulatory development, we'll see about a 6-month delay. But if you really want to know what CARB is thinking, we're probably a good 18 months from CARB even being able to finalize any sort of regulation as it relates to both of these bills. Now, with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to my colleagues at Adastra. I'm also happy to answer any questions that folks may have, but definitely appreciate the time and consideration this morning, and look forward to the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. All right. So Rob quickly touched on carbon emissions, so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So as he mentioned, Scope 3, that's essentially your value chain, anything related to supply chain, business travel, so anything indirect, and your purchased goods and services, fuel energy related activities. As you can see, there are many different categories that come into Scope 3. And then Scope 1 and 2 are emissions that are produced specifically by the reporting company directly or indirectly. So for Scope 1, we're talking about company vehicles producing emissions, company facilities producing emissions, and then from Scope 2, we're looking at purchased electricity, steam, heating, cooling for their own use, and related emissions that were produced during delivery process of all those utilities. Now, as I mentioned before, so we have sort of 3 buckets of companies in terms of their motivation, their goals within ESG, but at the same time, we kind of classify our customers, organizations that we worked with in 4 different ESG maturity levels. So from initiation to leadership. So we usually see companies at the very beginning of ESG implementation. So that's where they have no ESG knowledge, no ESG strategy, but suddenly they need to report, they need to create those very complex reports to support their requirements, to make sure that they produce reports on a timely basis for their regulators and for their investors potentially. Now, the second level here would be someone who already completed an ESG or sustainability report, but they did it manually. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort because, as you can imagine, all those topics that I described within ESG framework, they belong across so many different departments, lines of businesses across the organization. It might be necessary to collect it globally from different branches, from different offices. So normally this manual effort, it does take weeks or months to complete. And it's pretty complicated, pretty complex. It's very sort of prone to errors and mistakes. So here we're looking at manual processes, no data management. Now, the next level here would be someone who automated their data collection process, and their reports are KPI focused specifically on what is required for their, again, regulators for their ESG reporting, but they're not looking deeper. They're not trying to analyze and uncover trends and insights that they could use to, again, maybe to use to bring the organization to the next level and make some improvements in their processes. So it's kind of limited stakeholder communication because of that and no deeper insight. And then the very last ones are the ones who are looking to become the leaders on the market. So they're looking for some advanced analytics, maybe ideas for some AI ideas to enhance their ESG performance and incorporate it in a way into their business model and processes. So some of the common data challenges that majority of organizations and companies come across when they start looking into automating their ESG collection, ESG data collection would be data consistency. So that means that maybe your one office provides information, but the other one doesn't have it. So you need to set up a process that will make sure that you have all required data available for you. Data quality is essentially an issue where You might have wrong values where you have inconsistent data within the data set that was submitted to you and you're trying to make sense out of it. But for example, things like you have wrong dates or maybe you have wrong zip codes. It's just a very simple example, but might be something more complicated than that. And you might have wrong amounts or wrong quantities, which will obviously affect your ESG report. Data granularity is a challenge that occurs when you don't have your data at the level that you need. For example, maybe your ESG report must be at a monthly level, so you need to provide monthly level information about your, let's say, energy consumption for scope 2 emissions. But your offices only collect that information in an aggregated way at a quarterly level. So they basically cannot give you the information at the level that you're looking for. So you can, of course, make an assumption, just kind of estimate the value that would be a monthly value based on the quarterly, but at the same time, it will not give you the accuracy you might be looking for. Data coverage, again, similar to data consistency, you might be covering some aspects of, let's say, ESG, maybe scope 1 and 2 emissions, but your scope 3 emissions data is not available. So you have a big gap and you need to figure out where that data sits and how to get it in your report. Data timeliness is an important aspect as well, because sometimes it takes a lot of time for the data to become available for you, because maybe it goes through some manual pre-processing, some cleansing, and then by the time you get the data, it's already too late and your deadline is passed to submit your ESG report. Data governance is, I would say, one of the biggest topics on this page, because essentially data governance will help you to cover any governance requirements from your ESG reporting requirements, because it basically talks about processes required or related to the data within your organization. It talks about data ownership, data stewardship. It talks about data lineage so that you can track where your data is coming from, what were the calculations applied to it. Is there something that happened to this data that maybe made it unreliable at this point? So data governance is all about people and processes that are involved in data collection. Data integration is pretty much about bringing together all those different data sources, all those different data sets, and making them work together. Because as you can imagine, again, you need to have so much different data from different corners of your organization. So you have HR data, you have financial data, you have data about your supply chain, you have data about maybe production, sales, and all of this needs to be combined together into one large cohesive data set, or eventually potentially data warehouse that will be a large sort of data vault for you to use for your entire ESG reporting. So usually it requires a bit of a complex technical implementation where all those different data sources are streamlined and made available from one spot. Data volume is, again, I would say a pretty decent challenge for large organizations, because, like, for example, in my previous data integration block, we had, let's say, sales for, as you can imagine, for sales in a large organization, you'll have millions or hundreds of millions of transactions, and you need to store all this information somewhere. You need to make sure that, again, it arrives in time. So we're going back to data timeliness, and it's governed so that whoever needs to access or approve that data have access to that data. And that's why data security is also another very important aspect, the last but definitely not the least, because as you noticed, when it comes to E, it's still important, but I would say it's not as critical, especially as for S and G, when we're talking about employee-related data, financial-related data, and anything that could potentially be either personal information about people, so PII information, or anything sensitive about your organization. So we want to make sure that security is in place and is ready to go. So that's why with our clients, we usually go through this exercise of, I would say, 4 steps, where we are first talking to them about non-technical stuff. So we're talking to them about their ESG strategy. Have they started looking into ESG? Have they done anything? And if they are in that first bucket of maturity levels, so we'll go through discovery activities, maturity assessments, we'll help them to build their ESG strategy, build their roadmap so that they have this vision of how to bring their company, their organization from point A to point B, or from step 1 to step 4, going through all 4 steps one by one. Now, the reason I have the last 3 steps sort of in this rectangle is because this is where we are talking about data mainly. So here, what we would do is we would try to address all the challenges that you just saw on my previous slide in a comprehensive manner. So we'll start looking into your governance. You need to start looking about processes and people around it. You need to start understanding where the data is coming from. First of all, what data you need, then where it resides, and then how to bring it into one large data warehouse that will be used to produce your reporting that we will produce under the evaluate bucket. So that's where we start evaluating our ESG progress. That's where we start looking at specific KPIs and understanding trends and what's going on with our sustainable performance. Now, again, for companies who want to do something more, something better, they are also looking into exceed bucket, where we're looking with them into some of the digitalization of their business processes is a pretty common example of what people attempt. So as simple as paperless documentation, so things like that. They're looking into all possible innovations and optimizations. They're looking into target settings and updating their existing roadmap. And eventually it all comes down to ESG integration in their business model. Now, as I mentioned, yes, the entire goal here, the main goal is to bring together all data that you have and that is necessary for your ESG reporting. And one option here would be looking into ESG platforms available on the market. So they will help you to look into technical side of things as well as ESG sort of business side of things. So as you can see here, normally we have some core capabilities such as data collection, we have dashboards, we have standard reporting, and then some of additional capabilities you might have are, for example, materiality assessment. So this is something that you might need to do in order to understand what ESG reporting is required for your company. Some organizations are looking into scenario planning and modeling because they want to understand what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years from, let's say, climate change perspective, and how can they be ready for that change and how they can kind of future-proof their business. They want to look into benchmarking. They want to look into life cycle assessment for their products. So there are multiple companies that provide this service. So here are a few examples that I mentioned here. So Microsoft, they have something called Sustainability Manager. It's their ESG platform. ServiceNow, they have their own platform for this. IBM, SAP, I'm pretty sure you all know all 4 companies. So they have platforms that will cover all these capabilities, and I would say they would work for a majority of organizations for their reporting. Now, another option, and this is where, for example, what we do for our clients usually, because we don't really sell products, but rather we build custom solutions for them. And this option would be pretty much building your own custom cloud ESG data platform. The reason some of the customers want to do that is because normally they would already have some sort of data storage, like, for example, a data lake or data warehouse, and they're just missing certain components that are required for ESG. So they would ask us to bring the data into their main, again, data storage and make it available together with other data and other dashboards and reporting that they've been already producing. So this is just an example. It might be a little bit technical, but let's say one of our clients, they requested this solution where they wanted to have a file uploader utility where all their offices and dealerships, they could drop the files with required data. So the process would pick up the file and then load it into the data lake make it available there. It would go through all necessary checks in terms of data quality, data completeness, and available data so that it's correct KPIs that they're submitting, go through business rules, understand data gaps, and then it will essentially resurface at the end in their dashboard, pretty much ready. So it's an automated process that is, this entire pipeline is built once, and then you can just keep uploading files there every month. And unless you want to add maybe a new KPI, or you want to add maybe new users or new additional functionality, so that can stay for a very long time without any changes really. Now, just again, a few additional benefits of having an ESG platform, whether you are buying a product or implementing something custom, that's totally up to you, whatever works better for your organization, but definitely streamlining data ingestion and integration. It will help you to simplify that process. It will calculate everything for you. So for example, usually the platforms that I mentioned, they already have all carbon emission factors and libraries that would allow you to convert your values, your amount from your organization into respective emissions. So it will usually come with predefined dashboards. It will come with certain KPIs, scorecards, goals that will allow you to see very visually what's happening in your organization. What if there is something is lacking in terms of ESG performance, how we can make it better, or maybe we're doing great in this area, so how can we take that success and just spread it across all other KPIs. Usually you can also build your own custom dashboards there, so you don't have to be sort of tied to what the platform has to offer. There's always opportunity for customization. Now, compliance, as I mentioned earlier, that's a big thing. So usually they come with predefined templates for various compliance and regulation standards that you can just automatically fill out based on the data that flows into your platform. And it already knows what KPIs to take, where to put them, and how to calculate them pretty much. And another thing here is that when you're going with larger platforms, they're usually audit ready. So if you need to go through a third-party verification or something like that, this platform will allow you to do that. And of course, exceeding, so you have a lot of opportunities for forecasting, for detecting outliers, trends, different correlation, understanding your future emissions, understanding your future performance for ESG, and looking into different usually platform-generated insights. To be honest, as you all know, with various Gen AI solutions that are coming up pretty much almost every day right now, there's always something new and interesting on the market that gives you even more or even deeper insights into your data. Now, I just wanted to show this a use case present from Gartner, because I think it shows a pretty good idea in terms of how many opportunities are there in terms of sustainable innovation and ESG. So something we already mentioned before, some like waste management, recycling optimization, route optimization, things like water utility optimization, or maybe, let's say, things like monitoring prediction, equipment sustainability, waste reduction. All those things, as I mentioned before, on one hand, they help you to become a more, I would say, sustainable organization, ESG performing organization. But on the other hand, always look at it from the perspective of business side. So in most cases, yes, you might need to invest something to make it happen, but eventually on the long term, on the long run, it will help with cost optimization big time. So just a couple of success stories. That's basically some of the projects we implemented with our clients, but the only reason I wanted to show it is to give you ideas of how ESG can potentially impact your business, and some ideas that you might take and go back and think about. Maybe it will be a good opportunity in your company, in your organization as well. So simply just like a showcase and sharing ideas that you could potentially take and implement later. So this was a global fertilizer manufacturer. So they wanted to have a holistic view of their carbon impact and ESG performance. So what we did is we basically built a data platform that collected data from the entire organization globally across mainly environmental KPIs, as well as some of the social and governance KPIs. And it also included a carbon calculation engine that helped them to convert all their data, all the information into respective emissions. Now, for them, it was a very easy way to track and measure their progress towards their carbon reduction goals, because they had certain goals as a company to achieve. So it was a pretty good way to see where they are at any moment in time. And a global automotive manufacturer from Europe. So in this case, it was a little bit more related to, I would say, retail. So it was specifically for dealerships. What they were trying to do is they have a goal of becoming net zero carbon by 2050. And additionally, as I mentioned previously, in Europe now we have CSRD regulations and requirements. So they were trying to make sure they are prepared for that upcoming ESG reporting, which is required. So what they wanted to do is pretty much that custom ESG platform that I mentioned before. It was from this project. So they wanted to get an ability to collect data from all their 500 dealers across Europe, and they wanted real-time quality checks and calculation of emissions for each of their retail locations. So pretty much during this project, we were able to achieve multiple goals. So on one hand, we help them to get closer to their net zero goals by 2050, because now they had a very clear picture in terms of where each retail location was, how can they make it better, because they were looking a lot into scope 1 and 2 emissions here. So essentially, they were looking into how much energy they used, how much heating they used, what their fleet is doing. And they understood that, let's say, some of the locations were inside of a very old building, so they just relocated that retail location, and then it became much better in terms of heating requirements or heating consumption. On the other hand, because again, they reduced heating consumption or energy consumption, it helped to eliminate some of the cost behind it. But also another point here that not everyone think about is that because all their infrastructure, the data-related infrastructure, went from their normal servers, computers that were inside of their retail locations, it actually went into the cloud. So effectively, they reduced the amount of electricity they used, they reduced amount of emissions related to usage of their computers, waste management. They didn't have to think about how to essentially recycle, just to put it into waste later. So effectively, it also reduced their infrastructure costs and carbon footprint through the use of the cloud services. So that's kind of a separate benefit of moving everything into the cloud data platforms. So this is just another example of their dashboards. As you can see here, they're looking at carbon emissions by country. And then the next one is another automotive manufacturer. So this one was really interesting because it was about container loading optimization. So we helped them to develop an optimization model, looking through their cargo weight and dimensions. And we created a UI, kind of an app that they could take with them through their warehouses. And it achieved significant savings of 151 containers, reduction of 80 tons of CO2 emissions within just the first 6 months of production. And it increased their cargo load by 8%. So overall transportation efficiency was increased greatly in this case. So it was some substantial savings of almost, I think it's more than $1 billion in the first year. Now, this was another interesting project where one of our, again, automotive manufacturers, as you can see, it's a pretty common theme in Europe because they have a lot of automotive manufacturers. We were working with them on a cloud solution that would allow to set their machine settings for optimal energy use and still produce I would say produce their product according to their standards and meet all their quality expectations. Because the way it worked is They wanted to see if they can reduce the pressure a little bit that the machines produce, but at the same time, as I said, keep the same product standards, keep the same quality, just trying to save a little bit of energy by reducing this slight amount of pressure during the production cycle. So we were able to help them to do it at 15% decrease. Essentially, we built a data science solution that helped them to understand what is possible there, what is that sweet spot that will give them the best quality versus the highest reduction in energy usage. Now, another example about kind of container load, but on a smaller scale. So this is parcel fill optimization for one of the cosmetics companies in Europe as well. And the same idea, we help them to increase their average parcel fill rate. So we optimize space utilization. And in addition to sending fewer packages, so obviously saving costs, they also saved on waste. So they produced fewer additional packages and therefore reduced the waste at the end of this process. And one more example here would be route optimization for one of our distributors of building materials. So this is purely supply chain optimization. We were looking into optimizing their product forecasting for just-in-time product track allocation as well as route optimization. So it was pretty much a holistic overview of everything that they were doing related to supply chain and helping them to reduce the cost, reduce emissions, and effectively make their services better for their customers. So we help them to reduce their inventory waste, again, by product forecasting. There were no or significantly lower lost sales. And then optimizing inventory placement, cut the prep time by 10-15%. So it was a great success, and this solution is still in place. So we have 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to ask if there are maybe any questions, and maybe Catalina, if you wanted to add anything here as well.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have a question in the chat. It says, what sector of manufacturing in California have you seen the most opportunity for ESG reporting?
I would say that definitely retail. So we've seen a lot of uptake on retail in retail space, and as you saw, a lot of my examples, they were from automotive domain. So these are two biggest, I would say, lines of businesses that's been talking to us in terms of anything ESG related. And I would say one of the important points here is something that Rob mentioned previously. Okay, let me just turn on my camera as well. That not only, oops, sorry, just 1 second, some technical difficulties. All right. So it's not only that you need to provide emissions about your organization. The main challenge is really for all those companies that have so many different suppliers is to collect data from your suppliers, scope 3 emissions. So that's why retail, they have so many vendors working with them. They have this huge supply chain. Automobile, yes, like automotive industry, huge on that too. So of course they have internal emissions just from production, but at the same time, a gigantic amount of vendors and suppliers of different parts. I would say also we can talk about farming, food production in general. So of course, retail, yes, but at the same time, there is one step back from there. So all those guys, they also require a pretty big value chain to make their things happen. So this is probably the most common ones that we've seen so far. If I think about anything else, I'll let you know. But definitely anything that requires a lot of components involved in your manufacturing that are supplied from other vendors will be a big challenge. Yeah.
Awesome. And if there are any questions, any other questions from the audience watching, you're welcome to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box that there is. And we'll give it just a minute or so to see if we have any come through. Awesome. And then we'll also have our contact information up as well. If anyone in the audience would like to contact us.
There we go.
There we go. Perfect. So there is Katie's contact, the VP of Member Engagement here at CMTA. There's my contact. Any questions regarding membership or any other webinars or any specific questions about the presentation can go to our team or Artem Rasin, who is the account manager at Adastra. And yeah, I think the next slide is our newsletter. If you would like to stay up to date with manufacturing news, please feel free to pull out your phone and scan that QR code. Our communications department does a great job at putting out all of the need to knows for manufacturing. And it looks like we are approaching the 11 o'clock hour. So, looks like Artem would like to say something.
Thank you, Catalina. Hello, everyone. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier. We kind of just dove into it. But once again, I wanted to say a huge thank you to CMTA for helping us sponsor this and to having such a good amount of attendees with a versatility of backgrounds be present here. So really appreciate the opportunity to present this info to you. I'm personally based in the Bay Area, so I have a pretty good understanding and reach in terms of ESG initiatives in the various industries and various businesses in the Bay Area, as well as the greater California. So me and Alena, as well as the greater team, we've done a lot of work, not just discovering the opportunities to enter and to begin these conversations, but also to put some of our experience and expertise into work with according to best practices. So if any of this resonates, if any of this kind of sparks internal conversations, hopefully some of this gets brought up in other internal kind of chats. Always here for any kind of extended conversations. We'd love to dive deeper and double click into anything that you've heard today and do like a more specialized presentation into your specific questions or areas of expertise or the industry. So more than happy to double click into anything further. And yeah, feel free to kind of keep all the conversation avenues open between us and CMTA going forward. Once again, thanks everyone.
Yes, thank you so much. All those that have joined and all those that have registered and will be receiving a recording of this webinar. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.